Today we're talking about one of those stories that sounds fake at first. The kind of story that makes people pause a video, scroll to the comments, and immediately start arguing. A story about a guy who went on a date, thought everything was going perfectly, and then found out afterward that the person he had been seeing was transgender. Now, before we get into this, the interesting part isn't the shock value. The internet has heard every wild story imaginable. The interesting part is how this situation happened, how people reacted to it, and why it exploded into a huge debate online. So here's how the story goes. A guy in his mid-20s was travelling abroad. He was having a good time, meeting people, exploring the city, and basically doing what most tourists do when they're on vacation. One night he met a woman at a bar. They started talking. The conversation flowed naturally. They laughed, shared stories, and spent hours together. From his perspective, everything seemed completely normal. She was attractive, confident, funny, and according to him, there wasn't anything that stood out as unusual. They exchanged numbers and continued talking over the next few days. Eventually they went on more dates. Again, from his point of view, everything felt genuine. They got along well. There was chemistry. There were no obvious red flags, no dramatic moments, no awkward confrontations. Just two people spending time together. Now, if this sounds like the setup to a romantic movie, that's because up until this point, it basically was. But then, everything changed. One evening, they were talking about personal topics, family, childhood, life experiences, and during that conversation, she revealed something she hadn't mentioned before. She was transgender. According to the guy, his brain completely froze. Not because he hated her, not because she had treated him badly, not because she had done anything aggressive. He was shocked because he genuinely had no idea. The information completely blindsided him. Imagine believing you understand a situation perfectly, only for one sentence to suddenly force you to reevaluate everything. That's what happened. Now here's where the internet split into about 1,000 different factions. Some people argued that he had every right to feel shocked. Others argued that his reaction was overblown. Some people focused on honesty. Others focused on privacy. And suddenly what started as one person's awkward dating story became a massive online argument about identity, disclosure, relationships, and expectations. The guy later posted about the experience online. That was his first mistake. Because if there's one thing the internet loves, it's turning complicated situations into digital gladiator arenas. Within hours, thousands of people were debating the story. One group said the woman should have disclosed her transgender status much earlier. Their argument was simple. They believed major personal information should be shared before a relationship becomes serious. To them, transparency matters, not because being transgender is wrong, but because they believed people deserve the opportunity to make informed decisions about who they date. Then another group pushed back. Their argument was that transgender people often face discrimination, harassment, or even violence after revealing personal information. Because of that, they felt disclosure isn't always as simple or as safe as people assume. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't even about the original story anymore. It became a discussion about society itself. And that's where things got interesting. Because when you remove the emotional reactions and internet drama, you start seeing why situations like this become so controversial. Most people enter relationships carrying assumptions. Assumptions about background. Assumptions about experiences. Assumptions about identity. The vast majority of the time, those assumptions go unchallenged. But occasionally, something happens that forces those assumptions into the spotlight. And when that happens, people realize they never actually thought about these issues before. The guy admitted that after the initial shock wore off, he felt conflicted. On one hand, he was upset. On the other hand, he couldn't deny that he genuinely liked her. That's what made the situation difficult. If he had hated her personality, the decision would have been easy. If they had never connected emotionally, the story would have ended immediately. But that's not what happened. He liked spending time with her. He enjoyed her company. He respected her. And now he was trying to reconcile those feelings with information he hadn't expected. Many people watching the situation from the outside treated it like a simple yes or no question. Stay or leave, accept or reject, continue or stop. But real life rarely works like that. Human emotions are messy. People are messy. Relationships are messy. The guy spent weeks thinking about what happened. He talked to friends. Some told him to walk away immediately. Others told him it shouldn't matter. The advice was completely contradictory, which is usually what happens when you ask multiple people for relationship advice. One friend basically told him, if you're uncomfortable, that's your answer. Another friend said, if you liked her before finding out, why does finding out suddenly change everything? Neither answer fully solved the problem, because both perspectives contained elements of truth. Meanwhile, the woman involved was dealing with her own challenges. According to later updates, she had struggled with disclosure in previous relationships. Some people reacted negatively. Others disappeared instantly. A few became hostile. As a result, she became cautious, very cautious. And while some people criticized that decision, others understood exactly why she felt that way. Again, there weren't easy answers, only complicated human experiences colliding with each other. The internet, of course, handled this situation with all the grace of a shopping cart rolling downhill. Memes appeared everywhere. Reaction videos started popping up. Comment sections exploded. People who had never met either person suddenly became experts on the situation. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was convinced their opinion was the correct one, and almost nobody agreed with anybody else. One of the most fascinating parts was seeing how different generations reacted. Older commenters often focused on traditional dating expectations. Younger commenters tended to focus more on identity and personal autonomy. Neither group was completely unified, but you could definitely see patterns emerging. The story became a mirror. People weren't really discussing the guy anymore. They were discussing their own beliefs, their own experiences, their own values. The original people involved almost became secondary characters in their own story. Months later, the guy posted another update, and surprisingly, it wasn't the dramatic conclusion people expected. There wasn't a screaming argument. There wasn't a public confrontation. There wasn't some massive betrayal arc. Instead, there was a mature conversation. The two of them sat down and talked honestly, for hours. They discussed expectations. They discussed fears. They discussed why certain decisions had been made. And for the first time, both sides fully explained their perspectives. Whether people agreed with those perspectives is another question entirely, but at least there was communication. Something the internet often forgets exists. According to the update, the conversation helped him understand her point of view. It didn't instantly solve everything. It didn't magically remove every concern, but it provided context. And context changes how people see situations. One thing that stood out was how differently the story looked once both perspectives were presented. When the guy first told the story, many people viewed him as the victim. When the woman shared her experiences, many people sympathized with her. By the end, a lot of people realized both individuals were dealing with difficult circumstances in different ways. That's usually how real life works. Real life isn't divided into heroes and villains. Most situations involve imperfect people making imperfect decisions. The internet hates ambiguity. It wants clean answers, simple narratives, instant judgments. But reality keeps refusing to cooperate. Years of social media have trained people to think every story needs a winner and a loser. Yet many situations don't have either. Sometimes they're only people trying to navigate complicated circumstances. This story became popular because it touched on questions people rarely discuss openly. Questions about trust, questions about communication, questions about expectations, questions about identity. The reason it generated millions of views wasn't because of scandal. It was because it forced people to think, whether they wanted to or not. And if you read through enough comments, something interesting happens. You start noticing how personal everyone's reactions are. Some commenters had experiences with dishonesty in relationships. Some had experiences with discrimination. Some related strongly to the guy. Others related strongly to the woman. Their opinions often reflected those experiences. Which makes sense. People interpret stories through the lens of their own lives. The same event can look completely different depending on who's observing it. Eventually, the attention faded. Like most internet controversies, people moved on to the next viral topic, the next argument, the next debate, the next outrage cycle. But the story remained memorable because it highlighted something important. Communication matters. Not because communication solves every problem, sometimes it doesn't. But without communication, misunderstandings grow larger, assumptions become stronger, and people end up arguing about things they never actually discussed. The guy entered the situation believing he understood everything. He didn't. The woman assumed certain risks and consequences based on past experiences. Those assumptions weren't completely accurate either. Both people learned something. Both people faced uncomfortable conversations, and both people walked away with a deeper understanding of perspectives they hadn't fully considered before. That's probably the biggest takeaway from the entire story. Not the shock. Not the memes. Not the comment wars, the conversations. Because at the end of the day, the viral headline gets attention. Dude accidentally sleeps with a ladyboy. That's the title people click. That's the phrase people share. That's the part people remember. But the actual story underneath is much more complicated. It's about expectations colliding with reality. It's about assumptions meeting new information. It's about two people navigating a situation neither of them expected to become a worldwide discussion. And perhaps most importantly, it's about how quickly the internet turns deeply personal experiences into public entertainment. One moment you're living your life. The next moment millions of strangers are debating your decisions. That's the strange reality of the modern internet. Every awkward moment has the potential to become content. Every misunderstanding has the potential to become a headline. Every personal experience has the potential to become a battlefield of opinions. And sometimes those stories reveal more about the audience than the people involved. Because while everyone was busy arguing about who was right and who was wrong, they were also revealing their own beliefs, values, and assumptions. The story became less about a guy and a transgender woman. It became a snapshot of how people think, how people react, and how society continues trying to navigate conversations that don't fit neatly into simple categories. That's why people kept talking about it long after the initial shock wore off. Not because the story was outrageous, because it was complicated. And complicated stories tend to stay with people a lot longer than simple ones.